Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about a book that I've just finished reading and completely adored. And apologies for the kind of slightly darker background here. This is because I literally just finished reading the book and wanted to talk about it now. And that book is, of course, as you will know from the title of said video, is Maggie Shipstead's Great Circle. Now this book is just really, I just think, so beautiful and incredible, and is the one that actually on the long list was the one that I had least really, well, I knew very little about and hadn't really thought I'd get on with. Well, I know, I thought I'd enjoy it, but I didn't think I'd love it quite as much as I did. And so I'm delighted to be able to talk about how much I adored this lovely book. I was about to say little book. It is not little. It is 600 pages. And as you find out in the acknowledgement section of the book, it was originally 1,000 pages, and Maggie Shipstead and her editors went to work to chisel it down into 600 pages. Which actually makes a lot of sense when you read the book. One thing that I found so absolutely special about the book was that for 600 pages, it still felt incredibly tight in so many areas of the book. And I thought that was something really special about it, actually, that I'm impressed that she managed to get that to happen with a book that length. But actually it makes sense. If it's 1,000 pages, the 400 pages that she got rid of would have been the sort of a bit of the bulky bit that was maybe holding it back. So anyway, and as with my other review videos for the long list, there will be spoilers, but those will be kind of signposted before I get there. So this first section should be fairly spoiler free, kind of largely talking about how I found the novel and kind of the overall plot and kind of bits that you would expect to hear about, and I'll then announce when it's sort of time to go into spoiler territory. So to start us off, this book is all about, ostensibly all about this woman, Marion Graves, who is going on who is sort of her life as she becomes a pilot. She is sort of coming up through the ranks in the sort of 20s and 30s in a time when women weren't really allowed to be pilots, and if they were sort of very strongly discouraged from doing so, and it was still a very masculine place and sort of male oriented place to be, and so as a result women often, even if they did make it to being pilots, had a really rough time. And this book does not hold back on letting you know about that. At the same time, there's a sort of parallel story of a woman called Hadley, who is an actress who sort of is famous for having been in sort of book adaptation films, but is sort of centre of some kind of scandal. And she, as a child, read Marion Graves's book and was sort of in love with her and sort of thought she was really interesting, but then kind of forgot about her for a few years. And we learn later in the book that she is sort of offered the chance to play Marion in a film adaptation, which is obviously a big moment for her. And I think this book does a really great job of balancing those two stories, because actually, as it happens, we get much more of the Marion story, and I think that's the right way round. I was sort of a bit nervous at some points when I knew we had two stories, that it would be a little bit too much of kind of, we have one character and they do this thing, and then the other character has something parallel happen, and these coincidences keep stacking up. And you know, I've read a few books like that where it's not worked. Some do manage it quite well, actually, but yeah, it doesn't always work. And I was really nervous that that was what this book was going to do. It did not do that. This book gave a lot more focus to Marion, and so actually when we got back to the Hadley parts, it really felt substantial, because we could sort of see the modern views of this woman, you know, the sort of how Marion's story is sort of reflected in the modern time, but it never felt, to me at least, too much like it was sort of dragging the other story in just for the sake of it, or kind of trying to force parallels where there weren't some. There were a few coincidences that were a bit, you know, like, oh, this person's also called Ruth, you know, at one point. But actually, I think apart from that, you know, I was willing to overlook a couple of those because the book was so brilliant. And we learn really early on that Marion's life has been so sort of dominated by sort of losing parents quite early on. We learn that Hadley's parents sort of have similarly died quite early on, and so there are these sort of natural parallels sort of being brought through of these two women really struggling to understand who they are in a society that isn't necessarily made up for them. So for Marion, that's kind of her trying to navigate the world as a woman who wants to be a pilot and is sort of overlooked by so many people. And when people are offering hands to help, it seems like there's always an expectation that something comes with it. Pardon me. And then in the modern day, when we have Hadley, the same thing essentially happens. We get these sort of stories essentially of Hollywood, or sort of the movie industry, and how there are a few sort of moments where Hadley is sort of, it's expected that she will do favors, sexual or otherwise, to get ahead in the film industry. And so it's really interesting to sort of see these parallels. Kind of kind of depressing in some ways, that obviously between the sort of many years of these two women's lives, that not that much has changed in that respect, and still obviously hasn't really. But it's really interesting to see, and I think this book does that really well, because there's a real tenderness, I think, to watching modern day Hadley as sort of, sort of her life's a bit chaotic at times, and kind of watching her try to really navigate this world, but actually having, sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, of people like Marion, as well. And I think it's really, really well handled. I think this book just does so many things that are glorious. I think longer books often have to really justify that length. And I think the fact that this has been chiseled down from 1,000 pages to 600 shows you that actually it's been worked on. It's not sort of a lazy kind of, yeah, here are some extra words. It's every word has been thought about. And that's something I actually noticed a lot throughout this book, which is that often we would have entire scenes take place, the death of a character, a really substantial moment in someone's life, or something else, take place over the space of 2 paragraphs maybe. Sort of, this will happen and then we'll see this, and then 1963 this will happen, and whole deaths, whole lives are recorded in those brief words. And I just think that was so beautifully done and really clever, actually, because I think it takes real skill to write something in that reminds me a lot of an author like William Trevor, who is also very, very good at kind of having a quick summary of someone's life in very few words. Bernardine Evaristo does it really well in Girl, Woman, Other, where often whole backstories are told in a couple of paragraphs, and yet you absolutely feel like you know these characters. I think it's a real skill, and I was so impressed by how Maggie Shipstead managed to make that happen throughout. And some of this really amazing kind of capacity for finding the right words can be seen in some of these quotes. And these quotes, again, don't worry, won't really give you spoilers, because I've kind of provided them here without context. But I just love the way that she describes things in so few words, but with really clever and startling uses of language. So, for example, she had yielded. She had come on board. She'd come aboard like a piece of baggage, silent and passively unwieldy. And that's brilliant. And then you get one like, she was at an age when the future adult rattles the child's bones like the bars of a cage. Like, come on, like, this is, like, that is stellar writing. And I was just so impressed by that throughout the book. I just think it's done so gorgeously. And yeah, I really, really loved it. For example, here, another one. We purify ourselves for life as though it were the grave. This is a city that's more afraid of death than any other. I said that to Oliver once, and he told me I was being a little negative. I said it to Siobhan, and she gave me the name of a shrink. I said it to the shrink, and he asked me if I thought people were wrong to fear death. I said I didn't think the fear was the problem as much as the struggle. I said I thought the struggle should be to accept death, not to defy it. And again, like, that is such a brilliant, it's kind of, it turns really poignant and sad, and it turns really funny, this kind of idea of her kind of saying the same thing to various people and them all basically pointing her somewhere else. I thought this was so brilliantly done. And I was so in love with how this book managed to really get that sense of epicness, which, it feels like it should be easier in a book that's, a bit longer. And so 600 pages naturally lends itself to being able to tell a more epic tale, perhaps, than a 200-page one, in theory. But I think it could also have just been absolute dross. And I think the real skill in this book is how it never really feels like she's adding additional details for no purpose. Everything seems to kind of come up and have a reason. A character we meet early on comes back in some other ways later. A tale that we're told at the beginning has a reference right at the end of the book as well as at various other points. Everything feels somewhat instructional and intentional here, and I think that's what's so brilliant about this book. It doesn't feel like, oh, here's the random character, here's some other bits, great, cool, go and do what you've got to do. Everything has been considered, and I don't know how Maggie Shipstead did it to kind of plan out a book that's 600 pages long, and particularly originally planning one that was 1,000. So I just think this is just an exceptional piece of literature. I also really urge you to check out a couple of other people's reviews on this. So Eric Carl Anderson over at Lonesome Reader has a really beautiful review of this, as does Draw Your Book. I think both worth checking out, so I'll leave links to those below. But I'm about to go into a few spoilers, and so with that, you have been warned. And so into spoiler territory. So I think one of the things that's most impressive about this book and most sort of powerful is the way that we learn various details of both women's lives that really have a proper relevance to other parts. So I mentioned briefly earlier about the idea of sort of exchanging sex for favors, or kind of being forced into doing that as part of career advancement, and we get a lot of that. So Hadley, there are some kind of encounters that are somewhat consensual, others that are not quite. It's a bit of a tricky one, but you know, there's a whole drama because she sleeps with her co-star in this Archangel series, and there's this brilliant moment where we meet the author of that series, who is really upset that Hadley has besmirched the brand of this book by sleeping with her co-star, who also plays a romantic interest in the book. And there is something so brilliantly observed about it, of this very self-important author who sort of marches in and is sort of, you know, is like, I created a world, what did you do? You did nothing, you know. And Hadley kind of fights back and basically says, but yes, when people think of the film, or when people think of the book now, the title, they see my face, not yours. And it's this really barbed, sort of catty reply that's really satisfying in the book, because this, I mean, you kind of think, Hadley, you're being a bit much, but at the same time, this author character is so absurd that you kind of enjoy this. At least I did. I don't know what that says about me, but it's so well captured, of this kind of author who's just like, I am a god, I have created all these fantastic things, what have you done with your life? And actually, what's really fascinating about it is Hadley in many ways does go on to do other things. We get this, when she starts playing the role of Marion, there are all these really fascinating moments where she disappears into the role, and people around her talk about how she has completely become Marion, which obviously further highlights this really important theme of the novel about these two women's parallel lives. And I think it's just so interestingly done, because we follow this woman who in Marion, who has such a rich and interesting life. She cuts her hair as a young girl so that she can pass as a boy and do lots of odd jobs to make money to be able to have these flying lessons. Then a man takes advantage of her and basically wants to marry her, and she is sort of, you know, she quite bluntly at one point says to him, when he's, you know, this slightly horrible man, we learn later, when he says, you know, what did you first see when you know, what did you see in me when you first saw me? And she says, you had a plane. And it's this wonderful kind of takedown of his very romantic, over the top kind of views, where he sort of essentially is, you know, she was a young girl at the time, I think, and he's sort of essentially seen her and taken advantage of her, and she is not afraid of letting him know that he has taken advantage of her. She's this really kind of ballsy character throughout, and I was so drawn to her. She has various sort of affairs and sort of love interests. She has a queer kind of love interest. Well, kind of there are a few moments where she dates women, particularly one woman, Ruth, and just there's this really big, it's a really beautiful sort of relationship between the two, because they are kind of trying to keep it hidden. Meanwhile, Marion still has a sort of a former flame who she loves in Caleb, and Ruth's partner is a gay man, or sort of closeted gay man who has a male lover, and it's just so well done that that there is something so well captured about it. And actually, I think that's the thing I found most engaging about Marion as a character, is she is so complex. It would have been really easy to paint her as sort of plucky Amelia Earhart light, who kind of wants to fly but doesn't manage for a while and is sort of doing all these things. But no, there's a world built around Marion to really flesh her out, and she's complicated. She makes lots of mistakes and does things that are horrible, and at the same time she is you know, a really powerful and beautiful character. You want to follow her for all of her flaws as well. And there's a quote here that I loved. I mean, it's a brutal one, potential content trigger warning in terms of sort of sexual assault essentially, but this is a scene where Barclay, her husband at the time, is sort of having sex with her, and there's this whole story of he wants to essentially he wants to kind of very physically ground her, in the sense of her not to fly. You know, he wants her to become pregnant, to become his wife, and or to sort of stay his wife and never leave him, never fly again, because he's worried about her dying. But it becomes this thing of control, because obviously when he married her, and when he first met her, she was sold on flying, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, she said, you know, part of the attraction to him was that he had a plane and was gonna let her use it. And this is how Maggie Shipstead writes this sex scene between the two of them. It's not particularly sexually explicit, but it is just so well observed, and I was blown away by this. Anyway, I will say it. I'll read it out rather. After that, she is kept to the ground, where the air feels thick and heavy, her movements sluggish. Barclay mates with her grimly, daily. She doesn't think he makes her suffer out of hate. She thinks he believes pregnancy will come as a kind of cure, convert her entirely and immediately to the woman he thinks she should be, prove he's been right all along. He believes she will love him for his rightness. Sometimes he rages at her for lying there like a corpse, trying to make me feel wrong about it. He insists she has been with other men, makes insinuations about Caleb, about lovers scattered as widely across Canada as his caches of booze. He gets better at catching her wrists, dodging her blows. Herself, her interior habitat, once full of purpose, has become hollow and inert and uncanny, as though she is a hermit crab who has somehow mistakenly shed the inner animal instead of the shell. Her body grows hard, bony, thinner than she's ever been. He is heavy on her. The air is heavy on her. Weight and oppression are constant, uniform. How do you write something like that? That's incredible. Just, I love that this incredibly brutal and kind of horrible scene in many ways is written as this whole sort of mechanism of control. We sort of see how he wants to control her. We see how he feels for her, and although he says that, you know, there's this sort of sense that he doesn't hate her, hate feels like it's part of this whole thing. I love that she says Barclay mates with her. The idea of it's not sex anymore, it's mating. He just wants to get her pregnant. This is the sort of tool of control. And this is bloody brilliant writing, in my opinion. Just like, how do you do that? And so I think I am just, yeah, I mean, I was already sold on this book anyway, fairly early in, but I was sort of hoping that it would keep that pace up. This quote is from just over halfway through the book, and so this writing stays this solid and brilliant, in my opinion, throughout. Even lines like, "I didn't so much make a decision as slide into an ongoing compromise." Ugh, brilliant. This is so well observed and so carefully managed and edited throughout, and I think that's just what's so special about this book. And in terms of other spoilers, this book then leads us also through more kind of trials and tribulations of these characters' lives. So Hadley has this whole thing about her being quite worried that she is going to be seen at first, and then she willingly takes part in this. She starts almost bargaining in some ways and seizing bits of power. So she at one point films a sexual encounter with her and her co-star Oliver, and she gives this on a USB to to the author of the books, who she's kind of already had no real problem with upsetting. And there is something so brilliant about that. She kind of knows that she has not only given away her power in some ways, but also really reclaimed it. She's holding on to it. That video could destroy her, but actually, as we see as well with Hadley, she reinvents herself. She creates a new version of who she is, and that version of who she is ultimately the success that she finds. She plays Marion and really delves into this woman's life in the same way that Marion, as we find out later in the book, reinvents herself constantly, not only through cutting her hair and presenting as a boy for a while, but then also she takes up with new lovers. And at the end of the book, we get this really beautiful, incredible revelation that she has actually completely created a brand new life for herself, in a way that is really quite startling and powerfully done. But also Hadley's reinvention takes other forms. Hadley kind of reclaims who she is as an actress and takes on this brand new role and keeps on thinking about how she wants to be an Oscar winner. But she also holds back the information that she could use for other various sort of points. So she basically finds out information about the fact that Marion may still be alive or lived on longer than people thought. She finds out about various lovers and various people being gay, but she never gives that information away. She holds it close. And there's something so interesting about almost that not necessarily even growth, but that change in Hadley over the story. There are moments early on where she's not afraid of anything becoming public, and she sort of sees it as, you know, she sort of, that allows her to have a brand new growth. It's basically cutting the cord on everything before. But later, other bits of information come out about a kind of casting director or someone, I think, who she had sort of had sex with or done something with. And she also sort of thinks about whether she wants to hold on to the power that is that information or to let it go. Ultimately, it comes out, but she seems more in control by that. And at the end, she does this really incredible thing where she's filming scenes, but basically concealing the information she knows about Marion's life without giving it away. And so she's basically acting, I think it describes her sort of acting twice, in the sense that she's not only acting the scene based on how they've filmed everything else in the film, but she's also trying to act like she doesn't know what's in these letters. And there's something so interesting about that. It's almost, it feels like Hadley is sort of the modern day woman, is really protecting Marion, the older woman, you know, from the woman from the past, and keeping her secrets to herself. And there's almost this kind of knowingness between the two women, of her sort of saying, well, actually, I'm guessing you didn't want this to come out and be public knowledge. I could make tons of money. I could be famous if I did this. And other people have sold Hadley out at various other points. There's a security guard who sells hotel footage of her kissing this casting director after he came out of her hotel room. And she chooses not to do that. She holds on to this knowledge, conceals it, and essentially protects this woman from her past, from the past, who is also in many ways part of Hadley's past, because she was an early inspiration from this book. And there is this, it's great, these two women never meet each other, but there is a knowingness and a kind of connection between the two that I just think is so powerful. And yeah, I loved this book. I think you might be able to tell. And so now this has made everything way more complicated, because now I've got another book that I want to add to my ever-growing shortlist, which has now gone far beyond 6. So that's going to be a problem. But I would love to hear your thoughts if you have read this book. There is so much more that I want to talk about for it, but I could literally go on all night. And as I record this, it's already after 9 o'clock, and you know, I'm apparently already a man in my 70s and will be soon going to sleep. But I would love to hear your thoughts on Great Circle. Pardon me, if you've checked it out. I know it's a book that not everybody got on with, and that's fair. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this book moved you or didn't move you, and sort of generally your thoughts on it, or any other books that are kind of similar, other kind of epics that are really interesting and powerful. I've been Bob the Booker, as always, and enjoy your reading. Take care. Bye-bye.